Welcome to Postwave. You're here with Eric and Trevor. Today we're going to be talking about Donald Hoffman's idea that your experience may bear no resemblance to actual reality.
When we look around us, we tend to see a world of well-defined objects with definite sizes and definite boundaries. But what if this appearance is just a construction that our brain has evolved to help us better move through the world and interact with our environment? So the main point of this article we're talking about is that reality has to be not what we see, because evolution by nature wouldn't evolve accurate perception of reality because it's wasteful. And the thing that evolution is trying to maximize is fitness. And so if it concentrates all its power on the fitness and ignores the actual reality because that's very complicated, then it will be more successful. So this is an article on the Quantum magazine website. It's an interview with Donald Hoffman, who's a cognitive scientist, and he studies perception and the nature of reality and how quantum physics might come into play with all of that. Yeah, there are a lot of other people right now. Roger Penrose is one who comes to mind, who's like a pretty renowned quantum physicist and is also saying a lot of things about like quantum physics being fundamental to consciousness somehow, or so it's all kind of tied together with perception and consciousness.
That's really cool, Trevor, because that's really in line with my own view of how the world is structured. A worldview that I've picked up several years ago, and I've been basically convinced of since. So it's really cool to see acclaimed support for those ideas. Namely, for me, the biggest, probably the most central thing to my understanding of the universe is that everything that exists stems from perception or from consciousness, however you want to phrase that.
Mm-hmm.
That it's the ideological reality that is precedent, and that the physical is a reflection of that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and fundamentally, all we have is our perception, and that could be completely different from, quote unquote, what's actually out there.
Yeah, so it struck me that there's a couple different perspectives you can take of saying the same idea, or maybe they're just two sides of the same idea. And I believe I've heard Donald Hoffman in a different source that I won't be able to quote right now, taking each of these perspectives. So yeah, the one idea is that the reality that we experience is not at all reflective of the actual objective reality, and that's a nature of our subjective experience. And the metaphor that was used prominently in my memory was that of the keyboard, the computer desktop. Actually, Trevor, do you want to explain that metaphor?
Yeah, I think about this like all the time when I'm like outside taking a walk and just like you look at a tree. It's like that's just like it's like an icon, or it's like And what he says is like no one thinks that that Microsoft Word file is actually like this blue rectangle somewhere in your computer. Like it's just ones and zeros. And in the same way, like objects are just probably just like quantum wave functions, like some combination of I don't really know how quantum physics works, but some combination of the, all the particles that makes up the, the being, whatever it is. So that's like the underlying circuitry that we can't see. And objects are just a evolutionarily useful way for us to like interact with our environment.
Yeah, great. And the other part of this that you had already mentioned was that the sort of intentional logical understanding of the universe is not the most adaptive view of the universe. It's not the best way to learn about things around us. And I like to think about how if you had, let's say you buy a new synthesizer or some other toy, and it comes and you unwrap it, and what's the first thing you do? Do you take out the instruction manual and read through it and memorize it?
Hell no.
And then, yeah, no, you go and you press some buttons and you see what happens. Yeah. And that's a much more effective way to understand the thing that you have.
Yeah.
But this is interesting to me because I'm not sure that this is actually a ubiquitous truth. I think it's definitely something that happens, but I don't know if it's true in every situation.
You mean it's true that nothing of what we see corresponds to underlying reality?
Well, yeah. So that it's more effective to approach reality through trial and error rather than through logical forethought.
Interesting.
And because that's what we see in artificial intelligence as well, as compared to pre-written computer programs.
Right.
So like you have in the traditional programming sense, you have like a program and the programmer tells it what to do and the machine does that thing. And that's really great for solved problems. But for not solved problems, a more intuitive approach that is embodied by artificial intelligence is much more effective. We see this in chess, where, well, for example, as well as many other strategy games, where the artificial intelligence through machine learning has been able to learn the system much more effectively than someone with a rote program. But if you have a game of tic-tac-toe, you can write a program pretty easily that will never lose at tic-tac-toe. And even if it's playing against the best tic-tac-toe AI you ever made, it's still solid.
Yeah, it's interesting. It makes me think. I forget which podcast this was, but they were talking about like how a lot of the progress in AI in the past, like 20, 30 years, all this crazy like neural network stuff, a lot of those advances are based a lot on just like hardware advances of just being able to like number crunch better and like do kind of trial and error better, and we actually we're still like pretty lagging in actual like functional programming type of artificial intelligence.
Wow, that's really interesting to me because you think about like what it takes to develop a logical structure and like an actual understanding, the amount of energy that goes into it. And according to Donald Hoffman's perspective, that takes more energy than simple trial and error. But you're saying that in a computer programming sense, which seems to be quite true, what you've just said, that the more limited computational ability is more conducive to forethought. Because you were saying that artificial intelligence, which relies on trial and error, is only possible now with our higher computational ability.
Right.
Whereas in an evolutionary environment, it's more effective to do the trial and error and to develop a structure that has a logical basis is much more expensive.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think a lot like evolution is just like such a crazy thing that like literally everything that we know is because of that as humans. Like
yeah, that we came out of that.
Mhm.
That the logical structures that we employ are birthed from chaos and disorder.
Yeah, but they've shaped us in such like an interesting way that it's like, yeah, like literally like sculpted our bodies and stuff over like millions of years. Like
yeah,
it's a little crazy. Yeah, I think we have a tendency to underestimate how much of our the way we think is like influenced by evolution, and how limited we are by what evolution wants us to see. And
absolutely, I think that's really true. Which is definitely my own subjective experience, but seems that you share a similar experience.
Yeah.
My friend just told me an interesting story about how she met her father as an adult. She never knew him as a child, and found that there were certain psychological things that they had in common without having ever shared had the opportunity for one of them to learn from the other. Like, for example, they're both very particular about the organization of a room and where things go in the room. And they have you could imagine that there's many different ways you could organize things in a room, and different people might have different ideas on what that is. But in their case, they both had the same idea of where everything should go. I am not entirely sure that this function of trial and error method being more effective than logical forethought is ubiquitous. I think there are certain situations in which it is very true, and other situations where it's not true. And why do I feel this way? You asked me, Trevor.
Why do you feel that way, Rick?
Well, it's because I have had the experience of learning a musical instrument. And I know you have as well, Trevor. So perhaps you can relate to this. In this long process over years and years of expanding a skill, a technical skill, you go through phases. There's phases of rapid growth, and there's plateaus where you seem to be progressing very little for a very long amount of time. And then eventually you'll break through and have another expansion of rapid growth, and then you'll hit another plateau. And what I've found for traversing this landscape is that in the rapid growth sections, it's the best thing ever to just try things and see what happens, natural selection. Try to play it this way, try to play it that way, see what works, use the other finger. Just do it, and that's the best way to learn. Whereas in that situation, you can actually really trip yourself up just trying to think about it too much, right? Oh, well, maybe I'm holding my wrist the wrong way, and I should... No, you just do it. But if you're at a plateau, there's nothing more valuable than taking a step back, thinking about it logically, and finding out what is the right way to progress before acting.
Yeah, no, it's that's like, you're just describing like the optimal way to like learn something, which is like really interesting to think about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what's so powerful for me about my musical practice is that it is directly analogous to learning in general.
Yeah, totally. Um, yeah, it's interesting to think about like learning across like different domains, like how is it different to teach a computer to play music versus like speak English? Like how do I mean, and when I say play, I mean like compose or play things that are indistinguishable from a human.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so he this is cool. So he's talking about like a mathematical model of consciousness. He says, I have pains, tastes, smells, all my sensory experiences, moods, emotions, and so forth. So I'm just going to say one part of this consciousness structure is a set of all possible experiences. When I'm having an experience, based on that experience, I may want to change what I'm doing. So I need to have a collection of possible actions I can take and a decision strategy that, given my experiences, allows me to change how I'm acting. I have a space of X experiences, a space G of actions, and an algorithm D that lets me choose a new action given my experiences. Then I posited a W for a world, which is also a probability space. Somehow the world affects my perceptions, so there's a perception map P from the world to my experiences, and when I act, I change the world, so there's a map A from the space of actions to the world. That's the entire structure. 6 elements. The claim is, this is the structure of consciousness. Which I think is like, it's an amazing formula. It's also like, I mean, it's like, it's obviously like a pretty like low res version of what an actual theory of consciousness would look like, but like it's cool to have some.
It's interesting to me because like definitely models like this feel like they're really valuable and can help us understand the world, but at the same time I don't think it's possible to have a conclusive model of consciousness. And I say that because I am of the personal belief that consciousness is the source of all of existence and is the nature of all of existence. And so in order to have a model that describes all of existence, well, the only thing that has enough processing power to do that is all of existence itself.
That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I like I mean the way I think about it is like well, it's kind of like the anthropological principle.
Could you explain that?
So that's like why. So basically, like, so why are the constants of the universe tuned so specifically to allow life like us?
Oh, sure.
Right. And the answer has to be, or the answer could be that they're that way because we're here to observe them. Otherwise, we wouldn't be observing them.
Yeah, exactly.
And it kind of, it makes you wonder if that's the case, then like, are there other multiverses that have, and it's randomly, tweaked settings, and it's like this genetic mutation thing where multiverses spawn and like change the, the constants slightly. So yeah. It's kind of like that with consciousness, right? Like why are you here observing this specific part of the universe?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And something I'm thinking about a lot is like, I'm not a religious person. Like, I basically, if I have a belief about the afterlife, it's that, basically you just live your life over and over again because the only place in the universe, in the complete space-time continuum that you exist is in your life, and therefore, at the same time though, so time is an illusion, right? But humans are stuck in time. So if you exist at every point in your life, right, at all times, the only reason you're feeling the passage through time is because you're a human and your perception makes you feel the passage of time, right? So
absolutely.
So but it's all the parts of your life are always there, right? Like the,
Yes.
because it's already happened, whether it's quantum mechanics or completely deterministic, it's all, it's all happening at once. Every possibility is, happening at once. And
Yeah.
completely uneducated.
Beautiful.
I don't know about uneducated, but layman, not quantum physicist.
Sure. But all the same, I think we can explore these topics without having credentials, because we're exploring with deductive reasoning. You can say this is this way because of that,
Mm-hmm.
and someone can say yes, that's true, or someone can say no, that's not true.
Yeah. It's a good question. It's a good question of how far you could actually go with deductive reasoning. Like,
Yeah. So like if you take the traditionally Descartesian view of I think therefore I am, and maybe modulate that to a more modern perspective of like I perceive therefore I am.
mm-hmm.
And if that's the central core of what you know, then what can you deduce from that about the world? What else can you know if you know that?
Right. But then you get to the problem of like, like if you have the formula, like if A then B, you can always ask like why. You can always just be asking like why, and
But that's the beauty of it, because if you start with this a firm footing, you have always the answer of because it's that way.
right. Well, that's
right?
that's what an axiom is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
It gets kind of tautological
Yeah.
if you keep wrapping over itself. But I think that's valid. I think that you can learn a lot and you can speak a lot of truth about the universe with those terms.
Yeah, it's definitely useful. Have you? I was actually listening to a little bit of like Roger Penrose before this, and he, I think it's interesting to bring in because he firmly believes that like consciousness is not computation because there are parts of the brain that are obviously computing things but aren't conscious.
Absolutely, I agree entirely.
Yeah, and that's what gives him the reason to say it is this some kind of quantum interaction.
Yeah, and that actually ties in with I feel like as a culture our understanding of what constitutes intelligence with regard to artificial intelligence. You have a program that knows all the moves to tic-tac-toe, and so it can always do things. Well, is that an artificial intelligence? Most people would say no, it's just a computer program, because all of it's like a known quantity. It's finite. It's everything there. It is always going to be just that. It's known from the beginning before it happens. Mm-hmm. So it has no ability to perceive. It's just mechanical. Whereas if you have an artificial intelligence that employs machine learning, it's exploring, it's learning things, it's finding out about its environment and making decisions based on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I always wonder how much like sensory input has to do with consciousness and intelligence, and like, because obviously those were like the main, some of the main drivers that shaped the way our brains work. But like, could a machine have consciousness without like sensory inputs? Like, I mean, because
that's an interesting question.
Because it is true, like if you're a human, if you're like locked in or something, like you still have thoughts, but you don't. I don't know if you still have sensations or not.
Well, is it possible to have an experience without any input at all? And I guess we'd have to generalize sensory input in the sense of artificial intelligence would include any informational input as well. So if you have a program that is not receiving any information, is that program running? Does it exist?
I guess, yeah, maybe it's a silly question. But I mean, like, I don't mean information coming. Yeah, I mean, what I mean by perception is, I guess, is foggy.
But that is actually, I think that's an interesting idea that you bring up, because you can have an experience even as a human where you can limit or expand your sensory input. And if you have a perspective that is not receiving sensory input, like a closed-minded, closed-visioned perspective, it sort of creates a feedback loop, as you were saying, where the only experience it's having is of its own inner workings.
Yeah.
And so it becomes more and more sure of that particular structure that it is the thing that there is. And it gets a very skewed perspective on the world.
Yeah. Yeah, we're all looking at things in a very, like, distorted way, and we don't really know that it's distorted because we don't have anything to compare it to.
But at the same time, we can have varying levels of distortion, and we can compare those experience of varying levels and see which ones are better adaptive to living. And in that, we can sort of form an understanding of which perspectives are more accurate. And actually, this is kind of where I differ from Donald Hoffman in his idea, because he speaks about how he talks about how perceptions are simply untrue or inaccurate. But I think that there's a lot more nuance there, and maybe we could say instead that our perceptions are abstractions from the truth, which are imperfect representations of the truth.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they're not totally disconnected from it.
Yeah. So when Hoffman says that it's impossible or nearly impossible to have a perception that is accurate, we can rephrase that as it's impossible or nearly impossible to have a perfect representation of the truth. In the same way that it's impossible to have anything in this world that's perfect.
Yeah.
Just add on to the end of that really made me think about Terence McKenna and his view of language. He talks about how language is an abstraction of the truth, and that words can never perfectly reflect the speaker's true meaning. But at the same time, like, you can use those imperfect reflections, and it's enough to get by. It's enough to communicate.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty miraculous when you think about it. Like, what's actually happening, that you can communicate anything at all.
Yeah. And that totally. Again, I'm gonna keep coming back to David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest, because it's such a comprehensive understanding of life as a human.
Yeah.
In Infinite Jest, he starts out with this experience described of an individual who has lost his ability to communicate. A very intelligent individual with lots of very perceptive and delicately phrased, very, very beautiful language, but it's all inside his head. And whenever he tries to communicate, he's just making horrible disconcerting sounds that no one understands.
Oh man. I can relate.
Yeah, right. That's what I was thinking, is like, I think everyone can relate to that experience to some degree. We've all had the experience of trying to communicate and not being able to express our ideas in a format that that other people can understand.
Yeah. And it's interesting. It kind of reminds me of like in a chess game, like you can't really like it's hard to, or like the art of it is all in looking enough moves ahead that you know what the next thing is that someone's going to say, or like you have to react to them.
You have to be aware of the shape of the other player.
Right.
So towards the end of the article, they pose this dilemma, and they ask, is space-time a fiction generated by the human mind as a convenient interface for interacting with truth, or is it an objective aspect of reality? And the dilemma being that we can't necessarily know that one way or the other. But it's sort of one of those situations where you have a seemingly a paradox, it seems to me, but when you look from higher dimensionality, that paradox becomes resolved. And I'll say what I mean here. So it seems to me that the way to resolve this seeming paradox is if you consider that yourself as an individual is not limited to the confines of the human body, but rather that your body consists of nothing less than the entire universe and all of matter in space-time. Do you accept that?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Cool. And just for fun, I know we're both on the same page, but I feel like this is a point where a lot of people might have resistance in accepting this same idea. And so I just want to go through a thought process with you. Someone might define their body as ending at their skin, right?
Right.
They're the physical flesh and blood individual that they are. But let's say you take that individual and put it in a frictionless environment. So your typical physics blank slate, right? Yeah, no gravity. Let's say we put him in a universe where there's no gravity. What the hell are his legs for? The shape, like if you look down, look at the shape of your foot,
right,
and like the flatness on the bottom that's good for pushing against a solid surface.
right.
Like, why the hell would you be shaped that way if you were not part of an environment where you have a ground to walk upon?
Right. Yeah, no.
And in that very, very true sense, you have to say that the ground is a part of your physical organism.
Right. That's kind of what I mean when I say like evolution has sculpted our bodies over like millions of years. Like, and it's like, if you look at it, it's like, wow, that's a very obvious like appendage for walking on this, plane. Yeah. It's like with this amount of gravity. And
this may be backtracking on something we've said in a precursor episode. And sorry to interrupt. I want to hear what you were about to say.
Go for it.
Actually, what? Oh, okay. But save that thought, please. So then the other example. So someone might say, well, okay, your physical organism, your body, is defined not just by your flesh and blood, but by like what you can influence in the world. And like I can move my body, therefore the body is part of me. So what happens if you pick up a pebble? Is that pebble, is that part of your body now?
Yeah, I mean, I say I would just extend it to like your bubble of perception. So I mean, like, because if you just step outside and you see like a plane, like your you have the sense that like there's distance, but if you try to just like interpret the raw sensory data as much as you can, it's like there's just this like plane of like color that different kind of plane, just like a mirror or something. It's like it's just this flat surface that you're seeing everything on. And distance is kind of like it's there, but the like it's just like you touching something. It's like it's that close to you if you're seeing it.
Interesting. So that's an interesting way to define your body, is that which is limited to your physical perception. But here's another question for you. Let's say I posit that there's probably a galaxy that's really far away. It's beyond the sphere of the observable universe. But I think there's probably one out there, huh?
Yeah, on the sphere of the observable universe.
Yeah.
I mean, there's.
I want to pull that galaxy closer to me, assuming that it's there, which I am assuming. And so I'm going to step in the direction that I think it is. Now, as I do so, the molecules, the atoms that comprise my body are pulling gravitationally, and they pull gravitationally on everything around them. There is no finite distance over which gravity does not affect. Every single atom in existence is pulling on every other atom. So if I take a step towards this universe that I cannot perceive, if it's there, galaxy that I cannot perceive, if it's there, I am consciously and intentionally pulling that galaxy toward me.
Yeah. What's your point about like self versus like how to find your body? Like,
my point being that this thing which I cannot perceive is a part of my body. It's continuous with my own organism.
Right, because it's everything is influencing. Yeah, I mean, it's either that or everything you perceive and or influence. Only two right answers.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, but that's a fair point and a very so now that we're on the same page about that, and our listeners as well, hopefully, so I can continue and say that, so why is the dilemma of is space-time a fiction generated by the human mind as a convenient interface for interacting with the truth, or is it an objective aspect of reality? Why can that be solved by taking the entire universe as part of as your body and not just the human body? You ask me, Trevor. Well, if you take this view, then if you were to take like an average of all of experience, not just limited to the human experience, if you were to average every point, and that resembles an objective reality of space-time, where the objects remain when you're not looking at them, and things more or less follow the natural laws of physics. So you can have this understanding of yourself as the entire universe, and you can have a subjective experience without conflicting with the idea that space-time is a construct created by consciousness.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. It's interesting because I've heard some people talk about like space-time could definitely be a construct. We're not sure about time. Like time could go either way, but at least we know the second law of thermodynamics kind of like says something about time, that like it has to kind of go one direction in some way.
Is that F equals ma?
No. I think that's it's entropy always increases within a closed system, more or less.
Oh, okay.
I think. Yeah. So like basically, like the heat death of the universe is what you get from the second law of thermodynamics. Like everything.
Okay.
Like you can't unbake the cake. You can't unbreak the glass.
Yeah.
So time seems like it might be pretty fundamental in that way. But then you look at a lot of the equations for physics, and they work just as well backwards as they do forwards. And some theories in physics have just like completely leave out time, like it doesn't even really doesn't have to be factored in. It's interesting, but I think because the big thing with 20th century physics is gonna, or 21st century physics is gonna be like quantum gravity, right?
I've heard that.
Yeah,
I don't fully understand what that is.
Okay, cool. Basically, Einstein's theory of general relativity, right, is about basically it's the analogy of like the of space-time being like the rubber with like the bowling balls and stuff.
Sure.
And
objects with greater mass depress the rubber further.
Yeah. So it's getting that to work nice with quantum mechanics, especially around like black holes and things that are like really massive. Because you get like Hawking radiation, which is like even though nothing escapes from a black hole, like quantum effects make it so that little like virtual particle pairs, I think, are like annihilating themselves, and it's actually giving off radiation, so that throughout like at the heat death of the universe, the black holes will be slowly evaporating, over like trillions of years because of this Hawking radiation. And so that's part of what we don't understand about how quantum mechanics and gravity like work together. And the question is like, do we need to quantize gravity, or do we need to do it the other way around?
Interesting. Didn't CERN find a gravity particle?
So they found the Higgs boson, which I think gives particles mass. Yeah, but that's different.
I have no idea how that works.
it's I don't exactly understand. I mean, the big thing about that was it was the last particle in the standard model that they hadn't found, and basically, and the standard model is like has been really successful, and they found the last one, and they're just kind of trying to break it now, but like it's explaining everything so far. But they know there must be stuff they don't understand, because there's like dark matter and dark energy and like all this other stuff that we don't understand yet, and it has to be something with some kind of exotic particles we haven't seen yet, or some misunderstanding of gravity or quantum mechanics, or
yeah, that's really fascinating. I feel like the thing about like quantum mechanics that is super easy to overlook, for me at least, and I think probably for a lot of people as well, is the fact that it's in the name, quantizing, right? Mm-hmm. It's creating a grid to understand the universe. Now, if you have a universe that is on a fundamental level infinite, if you're quantizing that, you're never going to have a conclusive understanding at every scale. You may have quantization, you create a grid, and everything that fits within that grid you understand. But outside of the grid, maybe on a different scale, like when you zoom in, oh, look, there's another thing below that. Mm-hmm. Like we have atoms, and if we look in closer, we have these tiny little particles and quarks and stuff, and maybe when we look in there's like another particle, because we're never hitting it right on the nose, right? Like as soon as we go in, we like, have you ever looked at a Mandelbrot fractal zoom for a long time?
Oh yeah, totally.
Of course you have. Me too. And so you know how you look, and there's like an object that's approaching from. It looks like you're descending down into the this
Mm-hmm.
field, and there's like an object that a particular shape that keeps recurring, and you look like you're going straight towards it, straight towards it, straight towards it, straight towards it, and when you get really down to it, oh no, you're actually going right to the side of it.
Right, yeah.
I feel like it's that way with quantization always.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like trying to put a cap on an irregular number.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. So you're saying it's like artificial somehow?
Well, just yeah, that it's like, of course we're seeing it that way because that's where we're looking, you know?
Yeah, although I mean it yeah. Because even if you say, well, at the bottom level it has to be something, I mean that's just like human, based on our understanding of our physical world, that there has to be like a bottom level or something. There has to be some little bit that it can't get smaller than. Although we kind of know that exists. It's like it's called the Planck length.
Yeah, right. Which I'm skeptical about. I'm skeptical about that. I feel like maybe what that means really is that once you get beyond that scale, our existence as we understand it on the grander scale stops making any sense. That doesn't mean that there isn't any experience to be had within that scale.
Yeah, I mean, but how would you have any kind of information processing or like any kind of like?
Well, I guess what I'm postulating is that, like, we're assuming that at a certain point it's empty, right? Like when you get down to the Planck length, because correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, like it's as if you get down to a certain point and basically little tiny black holes are forming all of the time everywhere, that are so small that they just they're tiny universes popping in and out of existence, and they pop in and pop out rapidly because there's very, very little in them to exist, and in fact they're so small that any matter as we understand it in our grand universe cannot exist in that scale. But I feel like maybe if you were to be disembodied and imagine going down, shrinking down, and entering one of those little universes, I feel like if you were to keep going down into that, maybe, just maybe, there's something there. There's a little universe inside that.
Have you heard? Maybe, I don't know. I mean, what do you mean by that?
I don't know.
It makes me think of
postulating.
Yeah, people have like talked about, or theorized that we might just be like the projection, like a holographic projection on the surface of a black hole.
Yeah,
which is kind of crazy. I mean, like, yeah, if you think about like how many black holes there are in the universe, and it's like, oh, there's this like mysterious object that's like everywhere, like scattered throughout the whole universe, and if that's the thing that's like creating other universes, that's kind of crazy to think about.
Yeah, that's remarkable. Actually, I want to share because that topic exactly I was writing about in this journal somewhere. I'm just going to read a little bit of this. Perhaps you'll find it interesting. All matter and energy represents data. The information of my memories and personality is stored in my physical body. If you observe me from certain perspectives, you can restore that data. When a body enters a black hole, all, except for Hawking radiation, that data is retained. If you know what in If you know in what way the body entered the black hole, you can theoretically reconstruct the body, that is, observe its representation within the black hole, despite all the particles having been ripped apart. It's kind of like, have you seen that thing where you have like certain different colored gels of a particular kind of gel in a canister? Smarter Every Day did this. And you have like a thing stirring at a constant rate. You have a crank and it spins it around. It like distorts and drags the stuff closer to the pedal in the middle faster than the stuff away from it, and so it like takes the shape and makes a big spiral shape. But if you reverse it, it actually can go back to the original shape it was before it got all distorted. Which is really cool. But anyway, so if you know in what way the body entered the black hole, you can theoretically reconstruct the body, that is, observe its representation within the black hole, despite all the particles having been ripped apart. If one observes the trajectory of all the particles that enter the black hole, and uses that data to infer all of the data represented by that matter, one is in a perspective of knowledge, of omniscience about the world within, as one can also know certain but not all things, in which case one is in a state of knowledge but not in a state of omniscience. So it is from exactly this perspective that the universe within is manifest, using that trajectory as a constant. And that constant would be time, actually. So we're talking about like a physical perspective, like a physical spatial dimension, a straight trajectory, and that trajectory would manifest as time to the inhabitants of the black hole, and manifesting all the information in n dimensions around it as a beam of light shining through a complex structured object where light is only admitted from certain perspectives. And I have a diagram here.
Interesting. Wow.
I don't know
When did you write that?
This would have been I don't have a year here, but this was probably junior year.
Cool.
Yeah. So you have the circle here in the middle, you can imagine that as the black hole, and there's squiggly lines inside representing the data, the matter that is inside the black hole. Now I've drawn this arrow pointing straight into the center of this circle and through it. And so the way I'm kind of imagining this is that black hole from the outside, if you go into it and follow this trajectory straight following this trajectory at a constant rate, that trajectory is essentially time. And over the course of time, the universe expands or does whatever it does and grows outward.
That's super interesting. I really don't know how to respond.
And I go a little bit further. So you notice here I've drawn a couple other trajectories. Maybe it's, I don't know if you can see that, it's pretty faint.
Yeah.
Well, there's a couple other lines that go in at angles. Like here's one, and here's another. They're just arbitrary. So there are other trajectories that you can look into that black hole. Now these trajectories are, as I mentioned earlier, incomplete. They're like shining the light through in a way where not all of it's getting through. these would be representative of an understanding of the black hole that is knowledgeable but not omniscient. So now imagine you have this other trajectory, this other spatial dimension that you are progressing through at a constant rate. That, for its inhabitants, is time. So you can have multiple trajectories concurrently where that trajectory is time for whoever is experiencing it.
Yeah. So are you saying time and space kind of switch places a little bit, or like?
Yeah, or that they can be. They're it's an arbitrary distinction. And what makes time unique is that you're not free to move around in it. Otherwise, it would be space.
I don't know about that.
Oh, what do you mean?
Well, I mean that's very tied to our human experience in the world. Like I said, I think we're tied to time because of our perception, but there's nothing intrinsic about time that, I don't think that's the thing that makes the two different.
Well, because I'm saying that because from a physical perspective, as by special relativity, time is treated as identical to space, and so in that sense, they're basically they're the same thing, and so why would we perceive them as different while them actually being the same? Well, if we look at what time is for us, it's kind of this inexorable force, right? It's moving forward and never backward. You can't go back and change things, right? You can't unbake the cake.
Right.
And so, yeah.
But I'm saying that's only a product of, okay, so maybe this is a weird or not a non-existent distinction to make, but yes, entropy exists and will tend to increase, and you can't unbake the cake. But that's just the sequence of events, but they still all exist at the same time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So I feel like theoretically, at any given point in space-time, you could draw a different trajectory of time crossing through that point, and you could have an entirely different experience of life by an entirely different being, which intersects the exact same point of space-time that you are. Yeah.
I mean, there's perception isn't limited by our the way we feel like consciousness is limited to our brains. Does that make sense?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And to me, that actually really verifies the perspective of life, of existence being timeless, and of existing in any given point in space-time perpetually, not being intrinsically driven onward through time. And yet we experience time driving us on intrinsically. And so what are we going to do about that?
Yeah.
I feel like it has to, I mean, maybe it doesn't have to figure into our understanding of the universe. Maybe it's totally fine to have an understanding that says, oh, doesn't matter.
Yeah. I don't know if I like thinking about it, but I don't know if I'm educated enough to guess about what it actually is.
Well, Michio Kaku writes about how he got into theoretical physics. No, not Michio Kaku. I'm sorry. Feynman. Was it? I believe it was Feynman. Talks about in an interview, he mentioned how he got into theoretical physics as a child, and he read a book he read a book, and at the end of the book it said, "Further research is needed. We don't fully understand this yet." And so he said, "Oh, okay." This smart little kid goes, let me see if I can understand it." And he studied up, and he came up with his own ideas. A kid, Yeah. So I feel like it's actually can be really valid to talk about things even if you don't have the credentials. Maybe these ideas can hopefully spark some understanding in someone who other people who can manifest it in different ways.
Yeah, or at least curiosity.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, so this is a little bit of a stretch, but it is just some postulations that I've written in my journal in the past. So we have these different cross sections of time crossing through this membrane of a black hole. Each trajectory taken through represents another passing through space-time. And you have these happening concurrently. So you have these other experiences in the same universe as you that you cannot perceive.
Yeah.
That are like in places that you are. There's something there, but you can't perceive it. What does that sound like to you?
I don't know. Spirits.
Okay, yeah. Well, sure, you can definitely take that. And actually, I think that's a really valid thought to explore. But I was going more in the direction of dark matter and energy.
Oh. Yeah.
I don't know.
Interesting.
Here's where I am looking back at this journal I wrote several years ago. Like, it seems interesting. I don't know if it's true, but at the same time, I also have no reason to think it's not true.
Well, I mean, how much do you know about like astrophysics and stuff?
At the time, I was reading a lot of Michio Kaku and listening to Neil deGrasse Tyson. At least I felt like I knew some stuff. At least in a layman's term perspective.
It's interesting. So you're saying there's kind of like multiple universes existing on top of each other all at once? Or is it?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it depends on what you mean by right on top of each other. Right? Because
yeah, go on.
Because like some people will say like even locality is like not fundamental. Like the idea of two things being next to each other and only affecting the things next to, you only affect the things that are touching you directly, and then that affects the other things. That's not necessarily important to understanding how the universe works.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
If you have an identity like a physical organism, and with a very particular set of experiences and personality, and then you have a duplicate of that in such a way that's reflected symmetrically within the universe so that it is actually in every conceivable way identical. Is it in the same place?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't think necessarily. I mean, like basically, I think it also ties back to like how you think quantum mechanics actually plays out, like whether you think it's many worlds or like whether it's the Copenhagen interpretation, which depends how you interpret quantum mechanics. So the Copenhagen interpretation is basically that the wave function collapses once you observe it, right? Or once it interacts with the system. The term observer is kind of a weird word. And then many worlds is that it's constantly branching and everything exists at once.
Yeah.
Right. So as far as like locality is concerned, if it's everything's happening at once, then it's just this huge wave function that's just dividing over and over again. Like I think about it like harmonics on like a guitar string or something. It's just like It's because kind of this one function, and locality is not something that matters as much. Like time could be more fundamental than locality, which is interesting.
Yeah. And if it is, and if we believe time to be a construct or an illusion, then what does that tell you about the perspective? Which is not to say that at all that it's invalid, just it kind of may speak to some putting it into its own perspective. I'm using the word perspective a lot.
That's just your perspective.
Well, perspective.
So I think, I mean, one of the most exciting things about talking about this kind of stuff is that we will probably get some kind of answer to these questions, hopefully within our lifetimes, assuming we live to be, in our 70s. Knock on wood. But, all this stuff about consciousness and like, I mean, obviously we won't know the fundamental nature of reality, whatever that means, maybe forever. But yeah, at least all this like perception and consciousness stuff, I feel like it's inevitable that it'll get worked out with AI, or at least we'll see, or at least we'll know more about it after having built like really powerful AI systems that are like able to interact and perceive the world in really like meaningful ways.
Absolutely. And I'm really curious to see how our culture will adapt to embracing these ideas about the fundamental nature of reality.
Yeah.
I think that was a really big transition for myself, going from more traditional assumption about the way the universe is structured to kind of realizing, oh crap, it's all just smoke and spiders string,
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good place to end.
Yeah, I think that about wraps it up. Yeah, good times.
Yeah.